the gateway to the West is now the gateway to the best.
Swing and get up, baby! Get up, get up, get up, get up! Home
The game is over. The series is over. The wait is over.
What's a happening, nerds? This is John, Nerding Out with Cards. And what I have tonight for you is a book report. I love, just combining books with collecting cards. Just because, we get to learn more about the players, the teams, the stories, and all that good stuff. And so what I'm going to do tonight is a book report on the K Chronicles by Dennis Marksbury. And hopefully you've heard of this book before. Russ over at Collecting Nolan, he's how I learned of this book because he did an interview with Dennis Marksbury. And then, there's other guys that have picked up the book, like, Jim Faulkner, 5714 collector and everything. But finally had a chance to read it because I am a bit backlogged on books and what have you. But this is really, really cool. And so, I'm not a Nolan Ryan collector. I'm not what you would call necessarily like a Nolan Ryan fan, but at the same time, you're a baseball fan. You know Nolan Ryan. He is unique, right? Because he's got the records, but it's the longevity, from the 60s to the 90s. I mean, it's just what an amazing story. However, I've said this before with a lot of players, they get just minimized, right? It's Nolan Ryan played forever. The no-hitters and the strikeouts. And there's so much more to Nolan Ryan than just that. And that's why I love, Russ's channel because, he's a super collector of Nolan Ryan, similar to how I am of Ozzie Smith. I did a collaboration with him a good while back, but then you got Brent, you got Jim, and they do that video every month where it's basically a Nolan Ryan celebration, and it's amazing stuff, because those guys definitively understand that Nolan Ryan is more than his 1968 rookie card, that he's more than the strikeouts, he's more than the no-hitters, and they're just huge fans of him, so that's why it's great stuff. I do have one Nolan Ryan card in my collection. You may have seen this before. But I got the Hostess panel because of the Ozzy on there. But that's my one Nolan Ryan card because that's how I collect, right? So then after watching the interview with Russ, I was just like, I like reading books about baseball cards and things like that. So I was like, I'm gonna pick up the book, and then as I was reading it, and you're going to find this funny, it actually ties into how I collect Yadier Molina a little bit. But I'll get that to that later, right? And so anyway, this book, right? So Dennis Marksbury wrote this book. And what I love about it is it gets into more than just the 7 no-hitters, more than just the, your average milestone marker for strikeouts and whatnot. It gets into the stories, and it's funny because he dedicated it to Nolan Ryan, but it gets into stories about like the players, the other players, right? Who's on the other side of the Nolan Ryan story. So you got like Sal Bando here, and what's cool is it gets into like, okay, he was the 1000th or the 2000th or 3,000 strikeout and moving forward and on. But it gets into the player, right? Like their career, their story too. It talks about how they did against Nolan Ryan within their career. A story that I had heard of before was, Nolan Ryan's 3,000 strikeout. Why is that? Because, he was also Bob Gibson's 3,000 strikeout. So really cool stuff. And then it gets into players. Let me find one here. Like Nolan Ryan's last strikeout. We did not know it was going to be his last strikeout at the time, right? But catchers who were important to his career. You got Jeff Torborg here. And really cool because it gets into his story too. Caught multiple no-hitters. There was another player in the book that it was like that too. It gets into this player right here. It's Rudy Mioli. And it was a really cool story because Rudy Mioli was a part of multiple Nolan Ryan no hitters and then multiple Nolan Ryan one hitters, right? Because we know that he has the all time record for no hitters and one hitters and two hitters. But it gets into the story about how he made amazing plays for the no hitters, and then just it's a game of inches, right? Just so close to Nolan Ryan getting more no hitters, right? But it gets into his story and how he intersects with Nolan Ryan's overall story and greatness and everything. Because yeah, Ryan was on the mound. He's the one throwing the strikeouts, but you still have 8 other players on the field, right? Defense matters. I love defense. But it gets into the when Nolan Ryan set the record-setting single season record, but it's more than just he did it and it was 11 innings and he broke Sandy Koufax's record. It gets into the player he struck out to set the record, what that player had done against him earlier in the game. Just really cool stuff. This one was kind of fun. The summer of '83. Now you get somebody like myself who was a kid during the summer of '98, and the McGuire, Sosa chase. Griffey was a part of that earlier in the year, but when Nolan Ryan, Gaylord Perry, and Steve Carlton were going for the all-time strikeouts record from Walter Johnson, and the thing is, like, that had to have been like riveting, at that time. Uh, but at that time, you did not know that Nolan Ryan was going to pitch for another 10 years. You know what I mean? But really cool stuff. It gets into later on in the book, hitters who fared well against him. And so a guy like that is like George Brett. I know guys like Brent Richards knows about this, but Will Clark, his first major league at bat was against Nolan Ryan, and he hit a home run. That's just one of those cool things that does not fall into the strikeouts, no hitters, um, categories, right? It gets into fights and ejections. I mean, just absolutely fun stuff. And then, moving on is this book is just more or less, it's just like the other people that were a part of the Nolan Ryan story. And it was just so fascinating. I've read books about, Bob Feller, Ken Boyer, Red Shandies, and it's very much structured in the same format. It's when they were growing up, when they got into baseball, the major leagues, the career highlights, and then the end, and then this just went about it on such a different take. And I'm sure there's a bunch of Nolan Ryan books out there. I mean, so it's like, how can you do something different? And he did an amazing job on this book and how he did it. And I'm trying to find the pages here, but and with every page there was baseball card pictured with it of whatever player he was talking about, like you probably saw throughout this video so far. But what a really cool baseball card story this was. And he gets into like how he collected cards and things like that and the games that they played. But check this out. Like, this is a picture that make a ton of people cringe. And that is a Nolan Ryan rookie card with Jerry Koosman, and it's ripped in half. And he talks about in there, playing games with the cards, with making a lineup and everything. And so with like multiplayer cards, they would like rip them in half. So then that way it was just the player that they wanted. And that's what happened to that Nolan Ryan rookie card. And then later on down the road, he acquires these halves and sent them off to both players to have autographed. I don't know if you can see it better in that picture there, but just a cool story, right? It's a Nolan Ryan story with all the key players. It's a baseball card collecting story. I mean, just so cool, you know. And before I move on, more in depth is he provides a checklist or checklists, you know, and it gives a description in there. But if you go through all the parts of the book, chapters or whatever you want to call it, there's different sections, right? And so he created a checklist for people who read this book and want to get into the Nolan Ryan story, right? And what's cool is he doesn't list like specific cards, like years, manufacturers, numbers, or anything. It's just the person for each section, right? You know, record breaking moments, milestone strikeouts, fights and ejections, like I said earlier, you know, and you know, like behind the legend, you got Bobby Valentine, who was a teammate of Nolan Ryan, and then later on, the manager of Nolan Ryan. You know, here you got generations and lineages. He talks about that in the book. You know, it's the father son combos that Nolan Ryan played long enough to strike out each you know, the father and the son. But no, it's funny because I was reading that book and so there were things that like I've already collected similarly to, but with Yadier Molina, and it's funny because I'm gonna show these and then I'm gonna get more into Dennis Marksbury's work. Is, you know, I include these cards in this Yachty gold binder and you'll see why, but I had collected some of these cards and Dennis's book inspired two more purchases to go along with that Yachty book that I had showed before. But you know, so I include this in my Topps Gold page, but it's a part of that what I call Yadier Molina story, similar to what Dennis Marksbury did. You got Yachty's brothers, and then you wonder why a Sandy Alomar Jr. card is in here, and that's because Sandy Alomar Jr. was basically like Yachty's idol growing up. It's the player that he emulated as he was growing up and learning to play the catcher position. You got Dave Ricketts here. Yachty's called him, within that book, he calls him my angel, calls him a father figure. But he was within the Cardinals' farm system, development system when Yachty was drafted. And so you got this card right here, and Dave Ricketts was, according to Yachty, tremendous to his development with like footwork, you know, releasing the ball, you know, to catch somebody stealing, and framing pitches, and all the things that come with being a defensive catcher, you know. And, you know, recently Yachty was elected to the Cardinals Hall of Fame and Museum, and I listened to an interview, and Dave Ricketts gets brought up in that interview by Yachty. You got Mike Matheny. That's the guy that was the starter when Yachty came up, and he talks about it in that book about how he learned so much from him. And so Matheny is a part of that Yachty story. And similar to Bobby Valentine, he was a teammate of Yachty's, and then later on a manager of Yachty. And they went to the World Series together in 04 as teammates and 13 as manager-player combo. And you got Brandon Phillips, right? There's that section in the Nolan Ryan K Chronicles book about fights and everything. Well, Yachty's fight brawl with that was instigated with him and Brandon Phillips has a major section in that Yachty book, and so it's a major part of Yachty's story, right? You know, when I think of that moment, that's when I think of, like, you know, Yachty becoming that leader. You know, that's a part of, you know, when Yachty became a beloved Cardinal, and it's quite crazy too. And I joked around with Rob Cash Cards about this, but Brandon Phillips was elected to the Cincinnati Reds Hall of Fame and Museum, and this year as well, right? And I joked around with him. I was like, it's crazy how famous Yadier Molina made Brandon Phillips. But anyway, all of these are gold cards with the exception of Dave Ricketts, and actually all of them are Gold Glove award winners, with the exception of Jose Molina, but you know, could not include this card. It's just too damn cool. And then the other story or page or whatever that I have to go along with this, because I feel like it deserved its own page, and that's Adam Wainwright page, because those guys are, it's like peas and carrots, like I said. But I picked these cards because these are the 2 years in which they won the Gold Glove, and they're like one of like 4 or 5 battery mates to win the Gold Gloves, but they won those two the same year. And then these three at the bottom are Wayno All-Star cards, because those 3 years were the years that Wayno made the All-Star team, but at the same time, Yadier Molina made the All-Star team those 3 years as well. So that's why I picked these 5 cards, because of the Gold Gloves and the All-Star cards. So you can see, like, this book right here by Dennis Marksbury, it's just, yeah, it's a part of that Nolan Ryan story, but at the same time, with those checklists and everything like he provided, it's like an alternative way to collect. So you can have like a Nolan Ryan adjacent collection, because I consider those cards Yadier Molina adjacent. They're not a part of that Gold Glove collection per se. That's why when I did the showcase video, I did not show those. I saved them for this book review, because it's a really fun way to collect, and if you have a player that you just are enthralled with, and you really deep dive into their story, is there cards for you to collect along with those players' cards, right? But Dennis doesn't stop with the book, and that's the really cool thing. So I'm going to show you the website that he created, and that's this, the K Chronicles. And it, yeah, buy the book and everything. Some YouTube videos, again, by Russ, by Jim. But he sells card sets that he created, and all of them, it's of a player, yes. You see it right here. But then on the back, as you see right here, it's a continuation of the story. And it's almost like a continuation of the book that he wrote, which is really kind of fun. That, yeah, you can pick up the book and you can read it, but then at the same time you can also grow and learn more, and that he provides so much more. And that's one of the cool things about this website. And I'm going to show you one thing that I thought was amazing, is this right here, and it's a list of every single strikeout in Nolan Ryan's career. I'm not going to click through all of them, but you can see 1 through 5,714. Absolutely amazing. You know what I mean? But yeah, there's stories here. And Dennis, he actually got to interview a lot of players for this book, but it's just so cool. And this right here goes basically like every 500 strikeouts. Again, look at it. He's showing cards with them all, and they're all autographed too, because I think that's how he collects. But a lot of really neat stuff to check out on this video. This collector corner, it's got checklists on here, but it'd be kind of interesting to see how this website grows over time. But here, he got letters from players, interviews and transcripts. So the book itself is phenomenal, but if you get it and you read it, definitely go back over to this website right here, and just, it extends that book. Absolutely, absolutely awesome. So anyway, I hope you like this book review. I think it's really neat, unique how he did the book and how he combines the book with the website. And I think it's a potentially really fun way to collect if there's players that you just collect very in depth, uh, learn so much about their careers. There's just that other avenue that Dennis points out very well in his book, and as you can see, I've done with Yachty here. So anyway, thanks for nerding out with me through this book review.